academia is largely technophobic, or, the social sciences and humanities. And this is something that we call the two cultures problem. The people in STEM tend to be more techno-optimistic. They work with the tools. It's not universally true. Sometimes working with the tools makes you more anxious about them, but not in this case. Um, and the social sciences and humanities generally see it as their obligation and their wheelhouse to be critical of technology. So that's part of it. The two cultures problem in academia, and that maps onto politics as well. That the social sciences and humanities faculty are generally to the left of the STEM faculty, although STEM faculties are pretty left wing these days as well. Um, and then in society, the way that it's played out is that back to the Enlightenment and before, there was an association between people who expected radical social change from technologies, generally positive changes, and they would associate those with political and social, um, political changes. So the connection between scientific inquiry and free thought, for instance, is one example of the kind of in synergy between politics and science. Um, and the French Revolution unlocked a lot of French scientific discovery. So when you look back at that history, you say, well, a lot of the left, however you characterize the left, a lot of the left for about 150 years were people who argued that advancing technologies were going to enable utopian possibilities, and that this should be a project of social reform promoting technology. Now, the kinds of technologies they were promoting were things like, when we got to sewer socialism, it was, it's like building sewers. So we're not talking about spaceships, but the idea that electricity was going to be socially transformative. Lenin said that socialism plus electrification equaled communism. So there was this strong tradition. The U.S. progressives, promoted. They built the beginnings of the regulatory state, and this was the time of early electrification in the United States. So there was a strong association between progressive politics around the world and technology until World War II. And after World War II, because of the bomb, the counterculture, because of things that were happening in academia, like postmodernist theory, post-structuralism, certain kinds of post-Marxism. We had a real turn against technology on the part of the left, and a lot of the technologies that were being suggested as socially transformative were being promoted by the right, by corporations, and that's a particularly acute problem today. That, as I was saying, the association of futurism with billionaires has become a huge problem today. It's become a huge problem today, and a lot of the things that we want, like life extension, we think about Brian Johnson spending $1 million on himself, or Ray Kurzweil taking 250 pills a day or something like that, instead of the day-to-day things that we should be doing for people. So at any rate, there has been a problem. Leftists, intellectually and politically, have become more knee-jerk, technophobic. And I'll just add one more to that, which is when I got into bioethics as an academic discipline, we used to joke in our program in Chicago that you only needed one word to be a bioethicist, and that was going to be no, because that's where you're going to say to everything. So I think that's a huge problem. And I don't want to say that we should be techno-optimistic. I think when you look at a spectrum of opinion, I'm clearly on the techno-optimist end, according to most people in the field. But I don't see myself as a techno-optimist, and I don't think that one should aspire to be a techno-optimist or a pessimist, right? I think what one should aspire to is to be a realist about what the probabilities are that something is going to have positive or negative outcomes. And I just think that there's a systematic statistical bias in the way that leftists tend to think about these things. They think, oh, this is associated with a corporation, with white men or whatever. Therefore, it cannot be put to good. and that they just don't look at the history of, how, if it was true that every new technological innovation ratcheted oppression tighter on people, then we would never have had freedom, right? Because we've had a lot of technological innovation and we've gotten freer over time. Now, that freedom came through struggle. I'm not saying that the technology necessarily freed us, but the technology didn't make it harder to struggle. It obviously made it easier to struggle, right? Once we got everybody educated and well-fed, it was a lot easier to have accountable democracies. So I just think, that Luddism is ill serves us. In the current moment, I think the biggest problem is that there's going to be a huge backlash against these oligarchs. It's already started with an anti-AI data center backlash. Local communities trying to stop AI data centers. I think it's obvious that these data centers should be tightly regulated in terms of their water and electricity use and their burdens on communities and so forth. I would not be happy if the defining issue of the left, as we put fascism back in its historical trash can, that the defining issue becomes our opposition to artificial intelligence, because I just don't think that that's going to serve the left well. We're always going to be playing catch up, because artificial intelligence is going to keep advancing. And if we just look across the pond at China, you can see that I'm not saying that, I'm a supporter of the Chinese model. I've always been very critical of communism and the Chinese model. But the Chinese model illustrates that if you have a relatively efficient technocratic government that is interested in promoting the economic and technological strength of its country, that you could make the decision, as China has, to go green, right? They're beginning to reduce carbon emissions in China by they've become the world's manufacturer of solar technology. They're the world's manufacturer of electric cars, and they're putting artificial intelligence in everything. They have no compunction about what they put it into, right? Now, I think we need more privacy regulation, and clearly that's not one of the high priorities. It is legally in China a priority, but it's not a priority to keep anything safe or private from the government. So I think I'm glad that we're doing it more slowly. I'm glad that we're doing it more carefully, if that's what we're doing. I'm not sure that we're being more careful, but at least we're a little bit slower than what China's doing. But I think it's clear, if you look at China, that it's possible to have a pro-social orientation that is pro-technology as well. And that's the kind of politics I think we should be promoting.